At the beginning of a sentence, the preposition despite or in spite of are very similar to although. The difference is although is a subordinating conjunction followed by a subject and a verb. As prepositions, despite and in spite of are followed by nouns. Don't put a subject and a verb after either despite or in spite of. Despite the weather, we went to the beach. Here's the preposition despite, and then here is a noun. All of this is a prepositional phrase, and it's a good idea to put a comma right here when you are writing and using despite. You could also use in spite of. In spite of or despite. I think this one is a little easier to use because it's just one word. Both of these are similar to although. Although the weather, and then now we need a subject and a verb. So here's the subject. The weather was bad. And this is the verb that matches the subject. Although the weather was bad, and then just continue with this, we went to the beach. Here is a complex sentence that begins with a subordinating conjunction followed by a subject and a verb, comma, and then here is the main clause for this sentence. Over here, this is a simple sentence, we went to the beach, and it begins with a prepositional phrase, despite the weather. Again, after despite or in spite of, use only a noun. Don't use a subject and a verb. Despite and in spite of are used when there's some sort of a contrast or a difference between what you expect and what actually happens. So in this sentence, we arrived on time in spite of the traffic. The traffic was heavy. There was a lot of congestion. Yet this happened, which is unexpected. We arrived on time. You could also replace in spite of with despite. If you would like to change the order of this sentence, you could start with a prepositional phrase, which is right here, and say, in spite of, or despite. But if you use despite, don't use of. You would just say, despite the traffic, and then here would be a comma, and then this moves down here. We arrived on time. Despite the traffic, we arrived on time. Or in spite of the traffic, make sure there's a comma here if you're writing, we arrived on time. So the expectation is that this is bad, and you don't even have to say that it's bad. You don't need to say in spite of the bad traffic. It's not necessary because you begin with that preposition. He's able to get around despite his age. So what is implied here is that he's old, most likely old, but he could be young. When you imply as a speaker or when you're writing, you're saying something that might not be completely evident in the sentence that you use. So the listener, upon hearing this, will infer some type of meaning. This is a type of guess. So when the listener hears you say he's able to get around despite his age, then the listener, you, will infer that the person is old. And he could be very, very old. This could be a person in his 80s or 90s. Or begin the sentence with the prepositional phrase, despite his age, comma, he's able to get around. Or use in spite of his age, he's able to get around. If you recall from a previous video, get around means to travel or go from one place to another. Sometimes it's difficult for a person who's elderly to move around or travel. Despite the difficulty or despite being difficult, here's a gerund and an adjective, despite being difficult. And then here's a comma. You continue to study English. Despite the difficulty, or despite being difficult, you continue to study English. If this video helped you, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel.